Do you ever feel like speaking English is like walking on a tightrope? One wrong step, and it all feels awkward. But what if I told you there's a way to make it as smooth as a conversation with your best friend? Welcome to the Fluent Storybook. This is your place to improve your English through storytelling, where every story helps you become more confident, natural, and fluent in English. Let's dive into today's story. Millie was a curious girl who had always been fascinated by different languages and cultures. Growing up in a small American town, she often dreamed of traveling the world and connecting with people from all walks of life. English was her first language, but she wanted to improve her communication skills to sound more natural and relatable, especially as she started making friends from different parts of the country and even the world. But there was a problem. Whenever Millie spoke, she felt like something was missing. Her sentences were correct, her grammar was perfect, but her words felt robotic. She sounded formal, almost like she was reading from a script, and it made her feel awkward in casual conversations. One day, during a group project at school, Millie noticed how her classmates spoke effortlessly. They used phrases like, "Oh, for sure," or "No worries, I've got this." Their English wasn't just grammatically correct. It was full of energy and flow. When Millie tried to contribute, she caught herself speaking in a stiff, overly formal tone. "I believe this is the best approach to completing our assignment." It sounded fine, but it didn't match the casual, friendly vibe of her classmates. After the project ended, Millie overheard one of her classmates, Zoe, whisper to another, "She's nice, but she talks like a teacher." That comment stayed with Millie all day. She felt embarrassed, but also determined to figure out why her English sounded so unnatural. Millie decided to ask her English teacher for advice. Her teacher, Ms. Carter, was known for her creative teaching methods and her ability to make English feel alive. When Millie explained her struggle, Ms. Carter smiled and said, "Millie, English isn't just about words and rules. It's about rhythm, tone, and connection. Think of it like music. Every conversation has its own beat." Ms. Carter suggested an exercise. Start by observing how people talk in everyday situations. Listen to the phrases they use, the way their tone rises and falls, and how they pause. Then, practice those patterns until they feel natural to you. At first, Millie wasn't sure where to begin. She started paying close attention to her favorite TV shows and movies. She noticed how characters use contractions like "I'm" instead of "I am," and how they added expressions like "you know" or "right" to make their sentences feel more conversational. Millie decided to practice these patterns in front of her mirror. She felt silly at first, but it was just her and her reflection, so there was no one to judge her. She picked a simple sentence, "I'm going to the store." At first, she said it the way she normally would, with every word enunciated clearly. Then, she tried saying it like she heard on TV, "I'm going to go to the store." She noticed how much more relaxed and natural it sounded. She spent hours practicing phrases like, "What's up?" instead of "How are you doing today?" "That's awesome," instead of "That is wonderful." "No big deal," instead of "It is not a problem." The more she practiced, the more comfortable she felt. She even started adding a bit of expression and personality to her words. "Hey, that's cool," she said with a smile one day, imagining herself talking to a friend. After a week of practicing, Millie decided to try her new skills in real-life conversations. Her first opportunity came during lunch at school. Her friend Emily asked her about her weekend plans. Normally, Millie would respond with something formal like, "I will be visiting the library to study." But this time, she smiled and said, "I'm going to hit the library and get some studying done." Emily looked surprised, but in a good way. "Oh, nice. What are you studying?" she asked, continuing the conversation. For the first time, Millie felt like her words flowed naturally, and she wasn't overthinking every sentence. Despite her progress, Millie still felt nervous about making mistakes. She worried that if she used a phrase wrong or stumbled over her words, people might laugh at her. Ms. Carter reminded her that mistakes are part of the learning process. Every time you mess up, you're learning something new, she said. One day, Millie was chatting with a classmate about a math problem. She tried to use a casual phrase she had learned, but it came out awkwardly. Instead of saying, "It's no big deal," she said, "It's not a huge deal," or anything like that. Her classmate chuckled but said, "I get what you mean." That moment taught Millie an important lesson. Most people don't care if your words aren't perfect. What matters is that you're trying and that you're connecting with them. Millie also realized that she wasn't the only one struggling with this. She started noticing how some of her classmates from other countries work hard to make their English sound natural too. They would practice phrases together, laugh at their mistakes, and cheer each other on. This sense of community made Millie feel more confident. She began sharing what she learned with others. "Hey, did you know that Americans say, 'I'm beat' when they're tired?" she told a friend. She loved discovering these little phrases and sharing them, making English feel like a fun puzzle to solve. Over time, Millie stopped thinking of English as a subject she had to master and started seeing it as a tool for connection. She realized that speaking naturally wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present and engaged in the conversation. Her journey wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. Every step, from practicing in the mirror to facing real conversations, helped her feel more confident and natural in her English. Millie's struggle with stiff conversations became the foundation of her growth, teaching her that the key to speaking English naturally is to embrace the rhythm, make mistakes, and keep trying. Millie's confidence slowly began to grow as she took Ms. Carter's advice to heart. She had spent hours observing how her classmates and others around her spoke, picking up on the little phrases and expressions that gave their English a natural flow. But despite her progress, something still felt missing. She knew the words, she understood the grammar, and she even practiced the rhythm. Yet when it came time to have a real conversation, her sentences still felt rehearsed, almost robotic. One evening, as Millie was scrolling through her favorite social media app, she stumbled upon a video of an American vlogger. The vlogger was chatting casually while showing her day-to-day life. She wasn't using fancy words or complicated sentences. Instead, her language was full of expressions like, "Guess what?" and "Can't wait to show you this." Millie was fascinated. It wasn't the content of the video that captured her attention. It was how the vlogger spoke so effortlessly, as though she was having a one-on-one conversation with each viewer. Millie replayed the video several times, trying to mimic the way the vlogger spoke. She noticed how much energy and personality the words carried. They weren't phrases she'd learned in textbooks, but they were phrases that made her feel like she was part of a real conversation. Millie decided to take this as her next challenge, to discover and practice the kinds of phrases people used in everyday life. The next day, she walked into the school library with a notebook in hand. Instead of focusing on her usual homework assignments, Millie sat near groups of students and listened carefully to their conversations. She didn't want to eavesdrop too much, but she was curious about how they spoke to each other. She heard phrases like, "Hold on a sec," "You're kidding me," and "Oh, totally." These were the kinds of expressions that gave conversations their natural flow, but they were nowhere to be found in her grammar books. As Millie jotted down these phrases, she noticed how different they sounded from the way she spoke. Her sentences were always structured carefully, as if she were writing an essay. But the phrases she overheard were casual, full of contractions and little pauses that made them feel alive. Millie realized that these expressions were the key to making her English sound natural. Later that evening, she sat at her desk and opened her notebook, reviewing the phrases she had written down. "Okay," she said to herself, "if I want to sound natural, I need to practice these until they become second nature." She started by saying them out loud, one by one. "No way. You got to be kidding me. What's up? It's not a big deal." At first, the phrases felt strange on her tongue. She wasn't used to saying words like gonna or wanna instead of going to or want to. But the more she practiced, the more comfortable she became. She even tried combining the phrases into imaginary conversations. "Hey, what's up?" she said to her reflection in the mirror. "Oh, not much, just hanging out. What about you?" Millie found herself laughing at how silly she looked talking to herself, but she didn't mind. She knew this was an important step in her journey. A few days later, Millie decided to take her practice to the next level. She started watching TV shows and movies with subtitles, focusing on how the characters spoke. One of her favorite shows was a comedy about a group of friends in New York City. The characters' conversations were filled with playful banter, quick responses, and, most importantly, real-life phrases. Millie kept her notebook by her side, pausing the show to write down expressions she wanted to remember. One of her favorite scenes involved a character jokingly saying, "You're such a drama queen." Millie didn't understand the meaning at first, so she looked it up. When she realized it was a playful way of calling someone overly dramatic, she smiled. It wasn't something she'd use often, but it was another piece of the puzzle. Millie also started paying attention to how her teachers spoke. Even Ms. Carter, who was always professional in the classroom, used natural phrases when talking to students casually. Millie noticed her saying things like, "Let's wrap this up," or "You nailed it," during lessons. These little phrases carried a warmth and authenticity that made conversations feel less formal. One afternoon, while walking home from school, Millie decided to put her new skills to the test. She stopped by her favorite cafe to grab a cup of hot chocolate. When the barista asked, "How's your day going?" Millie hesitated for a moment. Normally, she would respond with something like, "My day has been fine, thank you." But this time, she smiled and said, "Not too bad. How about you?" The barista smiled back and said, "Pretty good. Thanks for asking." The exchange was brief, but it left Millie feeling proud. She had used a real-life phrase in a real conversation, and it had felt natural. As Millie continued practicing, she noticed a change in how people responded to her. Her friends began to engage with her more during conversations, and her classmates no longer teased her about sounding too formal. Even strangers seemed more at ease when she spoke casually. Millie realized that natural phrases weren't just about sounding fluent. They were about building connections and making people feel comfortable. One evening, Millie sat down with her parents to share what she had learned. She explained how natural phrases made conversations flow better and how they helped her feel more confident. Her mom nodded and said, "It's true. The way you say something matters just as much as the words you use." Millie decided to help her parents practice too. They weren't as focused on improving their English, but they were supportive of her journey. Together, they practiced phrases like, "No worries," and "That's awesome." Millie even taught them some of the slang she had picked up from TV shows, laughing as her dad tried to say, "It's lit." By the time Millie returned to school the following week, she felt like a new person. She still had a lot to learn, but she was excited about the progress she had made. During lunch, her friend Emily asked, "Have you seen the new movie that just came out?" Normally, Millie would have responded with a stiff, "No, I have not seen it yet." But instead, she said, "Not yet. Is it good?" Emily grinned and launched into a detailed description of the movie. Millie listened attentively, nodding and responding with phrases like, "No way," and "That's so cool." She wasn't just speaking English. She was having a real, natural conversation. As the day went on, Millie couldn't stop smiling. She felt like she had discovered a secret treasure, the power of real-life phrases. These small expressions had transformed the way she communicated, making her English feel less like a subject she was studying and more like a part of who she was. For Millie, this was only the beginning. She knew there were countless phrases and expressions left to learn, but she was excited for the journey ahead. Every conversation, every mistake, and every new phrase was a step toward becoming the confident, natural speaker she had always wanted to be. Millie's excitement about discovering real-life phrases transformed the way she approached English. But she soon realized that learning the phrases wasn't enough. If she truly wanted to speak naturally, she had to start using them in her daily life. The idea of practicing with others made her nervous. What if she said something wrong? What if someone laughed at her? But Millie knew she couldn't let her fears hold her back. One morning, while brushing her hair in front of the mirror, Millie thought about how far she had come. She had practiced real-life phrases at home, learned from TV shows and her classmates, and even used a few expressions at the cafe. But the real challenge was speaking in real-time conversations. She whispered to herself, "If I want to improve, I need to practice every single day." That day, Millie started with something simple. On her way to school, she greeted her neighbor, Mrs. Green, who was walking her dog. Instead of her usual shy wave, Millie smiled and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Green. How's Max doing today?" Mrs. Green stopped and smiled warmly. "Oh, Max is full of energy as always. How are you, Millie?" Millie felt a flicker of nervousness, but pushed through it. "I'm good, thanks. Just heading to school. Have a great day." As she walked away, Millie felt a small rush of pride. The conversation was brief, but it had felt natural. Mrs. Green's smile reassured her that she was doing something right. At school, Millie decided to challenge herself further. During lunch, she overheard her friends talking about an upcoming soccer game. Normally, Millie would stay quiet and listen, afraid of saying something that didn't fit. But this time, she decided to jump in. "Are you guys talking about Friday's game?" she asked, her voice steady. Her friend Emily nodded. "Yeah, we're playing against Jefferson High. It's going to be tough." Millie smiled and replied, "Oh, no way. Their team is super good, right?" Emily laughed. "Exactly. But we've been practicing a lot, so I think we have a shot." Millie continued the conversation, using some of the phrases she had practiced. She said things like, "That's awesome," and "Fingers crossed for you guys." For the first time, she felt like she was part of the group, not just an observer. Later that evening, Millie sat at her desk, reflecting on her day. She realized that every small conversation was a step forward. Each interaction helped her gain confidence and made speaking English feel less intimidating. The next week, Millie decided to set a daily goal for herself. She would start at least one new conversation every day. It didn't have to be long or complicated. Just a simple exchange that allowed her to practice speaking naturally. One day, Millie went to the library to return a book. She saw the librarian, Mr. Harris, sorting books behind the counter. Taking a deep breath, she approached him and said, "Hi, Mr. Harris. Do you have any good mystery books to recommend?" Mr. Harris looked up and smiled. "Ah, a fan of mysteries are we? Let me think. Have you read The Westing Game?" Millie shook her head. "No, I haven't." "Is it good?" "It's one of my favorites," Mr. Harris replied, handing her a copy. "Give it a try, and let me know what you think." "Thanks." "I will," Millie said, feeling a sense of accomplishment as she walked out with the book. Over time, Millie began to notice a change in herself. The more she practiced, the less she worried about making mistakes. She started speaking without overthinking every word, and her conversations flowed more smoothly. One weekend, Millie's family decided to visit a local farmer's market. The market was bustling with people, and there were stalls selling everything from fresh produce to handmade crafts. Millie's parents were busy looking at vegetables, so she wandered off to explore. She stopped at a stall selling homemade candles and struck up a conversation with the vendor. "These candles smell amazing," Millie said, picking up a lavender-scented one. "Thank you," the vendor replied. "We make them right here in town. Do you like lavender?" Millie nodded. "I love it. It's so relaxing. Do you have any other scents you recommend?" The vendor showed her a few more options, and they chatted for a few minutes. By the end of the conversation, Millie walked away with a candle in hand and a smile on her face. As the weeks went by, Millie started to challenge herself with more complex situations. One of the biggest challenges came during her school's group project. Millie was paired with 3 other classmates to work on a presentation about environmental conservation. She knew this was an opportunity to practice speaking in a group setting, but the thought of it made her nervous. During their first meeting, Millie decided to take the initiative. "Hey guys," she began, "I was thinking we could divide the project into sections. Maybe each of us could focus on one part, like recycling, water conservation, and renewable energy. What do you think?" Her classmates looked at her, surprised but impressed. "That's a great idea, Millie," Emily said. As they discussed the project, Millie found herself contributing more ideas and asking questions. She said things like, "That's a good point, but what if we did it this way? And let's make sure we have enough visuals for the presentation." Her classmates appreciated her input, and Millie felt proud of herself for stepping out of her comfort zone. By the time the presentation day arrived, Millie was nervous but prepared. She had practiced her part multiple times, focusing on speaking naturally and using some of the real-life phrases she had learned. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath and began. "Hi, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about how small actions can make a big difference in protecting our planet." As she spoke, Millie used phrases like, "For example," and "you might be wondering why this matters." She made eye contact with her audience and used gestures to emphasize her points. When she finished, her classmates applauded, and her teacher gave her a thumbs up. After class, Emily came up to her and said, "Millie, you did amazing. You sounded so confident up there." Millie smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Thanks, Emily. I've been practicing a lot." That night, Millie reflected on how far she had come. Just a few months ago, the idea of speaking in front of a group would have terrified her. But now, she felt confident and capable. She realized that her daily practice had paid off, not just in improving her English, but also in building her confidence. Millie made a promise to herself to keep practicing every day, whether it was starting a conversation with a stranger, speaking up in class, or even chatting with her family at dinner. She knew that each interaction, no matter how small, brought her one step closer to becoming the natural English speaker she wanted to be. As Millie drifted off to sleep that night, she felt a sense of accomplishment and excitement for the journey ahead. She knew there would still be challenges, but she was ready to face them with determination and confidence. For Millie, building confidence through everyday practice wasn't just a goal, it was a way of life. Millie had grown so much on her journey to speak English naturally. She had practiced real-life phrases, pushed herself into everyday conversations, and built her confidence step by step. But as she progressed, she noticed something missing. Her conversations were becoming smoother, but they still felt a little flat. She realized that while she was speaking clearly and correctly, her words lacked the personality that truly made conversations engaging and memorable. One day, while watching her favorite American TV show, Millie noticed how much the characters expressed themselves through their tone, humor, and gestures. They didn't just say words, they brought them to life. The way they told jokes, emphasized certain words, or even raised their eyebrows while speaking added so much depth to their conversations. Millie thought, "I want to sound like that, full of personality." She decided to start small. At school, during lunch, her friend Emily was talking about how she had tripped while running to catch the bus. Everyone laughed, and Millie saw an opportunity to add some personality to the conversation. Instead of just saying, "That's funny," like she usually would, Millie leaned in and exclaimed, "Emily, you must have looked like a cartoon character flying through the air." Her friends burst out laughing, and Emily playfully rolled her eyes. "Thanks for the mental image, Millie," she said, laughing along. Millie felt a spark of excitement. Adding a little humor had made the moment more fun and natural. Encouraged by this small success, Millie began experimenting with how she could make her words more expressive. She practiced in front of her mirror, trying out different tones and facial expressions. For example, instead of saying, I'm excited. She would try saying, I'm so excited, with a big smile and raised eyebrows. She realized that adding emphasis to certain words made her sound more genuine and enthusiastic. Millie's next big test came during her family dinner. Her parents asked how her day had been, and instead of her usual, it was fine, Millie decided to share a funny story. Well, she began dramatically. You won't believe what happened during math class today. Mr. Anderson started explaining the homework, and halfway through, he realized he was teaching us last week's assignment. Her parents laughed as Millie added more details, imitating her teacher's confused expression and the way the class erupted into giggles. And then, Millie continued, her voice rising with excitement. He just stopped and said, Well, I guess I need more coffee. Her mom chuckled. You're really good at storytelling, Millie. That was so funny. Hearing her mom's compliment boosted Millie's confidence. She realized that when she added her personality to her words, people connected with her more. It wasn't just about the words she used. It was about how she said them. To take things further, Millie decided to work on using idioms and expressions to make her speech even more colorful. She remembered her teacher once saying, Idioms are the spices of a language. They make it taste better. Millie loved that idea and started learning some common idioms. The next day, during a group discussion in class, her classmate Jake mentioned how nervous he was about their upcoming science test. Millie smiled and said, Don't worry, Jake. You'll do great. Just remember, practice makes perfect. Then she added with a wink, and if all else fails, just fake it till you make it. Her classmates laughed, and Jake grinned. Thanks, Millie. I'll try to remember that. Millie felt a sense of pride. Using idioms had made her advice sound more natural and fun. She decided to keep collecting new ones to use in different situations. One weekend, Millie's family attended a birthday party for her cousin Sarah. The room was filled with relatives and friends, and Millie saw it as a perfect opportunity to practice. When her aunt complimented her on how much she had grown, Millie replied, Thank you. I guess I've been eating my veggies after all. Her aunt laughed and said, You're such a charmer, Millie. Later, Millie joined a group of cousins who were talking about their favorite TV shows. Normally, she would have just listened quietly, but this time, she jumped in. Oh, have you guys seen The Amazing Race? It's so cool. I was literally on the edge of my seat during last week's episode. Her cousins agreed enthusiastically, and Millie found herself chatting and laughing with them for the rest of the evening. She realized that adding personality to her words not only made her conversations more enjoyable, but also helped her connect with people on a deeper level. Millie also started paying attention to her tone of voice. She noticed how her teachers used changes in pitch to keep the class interested. Inspired, Millie began practicing speaking with more variety in her tone. For example, when she was excited, she would let her voice rise and fall dramatically. When she was being serious, she would lower her voice slightly and speak more slowly. At school, during a presentation on her favorite book, Millie decided to put everything she had learned into practice. She started her speech with, Imagine a world where animals could talk and solve mysteries. Her tone was playful, and she paused for effect before continuing. As she described the plot, she used expressions like, It blew my mind, and you have to read it to believe it. She also added gestures, like widening her eyes to show surprise or using her hands to emphasize a point. When she finished, her classmates clapped enthusiastically, and her teacher said, Millie, that was fantastic. You brought the story to life. Over time, Millie found that adding personality to her words had become second nature. Whether she was talking to her friends, answering a question in class, or even chatting with the cashier at the grocery store, she spoke with confidence, humor, and warmth. One day, as she walked home from school, Millie thought about how much she had changed. She no longer worried about sounding stiff or boring. Instead, she focused on expressing herself in a way that felt true to who she was. She realized that speaking English naturally wasn't just about the words. It was about making those words her own. As she opened the door to her house, Millie smiled to herself. Her journey wasn't over yet, but she was proud of how far she had come. With each conversation, she was discovering more about herself and the joy of truly connecting with others through her words. Millie's journey to speaking English naturally had been full of challenges, discoveries, and moments of triumph. Over time, the awkward, stiff conversations she used to dread had transformed into natural, flowing interactions. By adding personality to her words and embracing the beauty of real-life phrases, she had created a new rhythm in her speech, one that felt effortless and uniquely her own. But the most remarkable thing was how speaking English had become second nature to her, a part of her identity that no longer felt foreign or forced. One sunny Saturday morning, Millie found herself at a local community event. The park was buzzing with activity, kids running around, food trucks lined up, and small booths selling crafts and artwork. Millie had volunteered to help at a booth promoting a reading program for kids. She loved books and thought it would be a great opportunity to give back while practicing her English. As parents and kids came by, Millie greeted them warmly, explaining the program and answering questions. At one point, a little boy hesitated by the booth, looking shy. Millie crouched down and smiled. "Hi there. Do you like books?" she asked gently. The boy nodded but didn't say anything. Millie continued, "I used to be shy too. But you know what helped me? Reading stories about superheroes. Do you have a favorite superhero?" The boy's face lit up. "Spider-Man," he exclaimed. Millie laughed and said, "Spider-Man's the best. Did you know reading about Spider-Man can make you a superhero in learning, too?" The boy giggled, and his mom thanked Millie for her kindness. Moments like these felt so natural to Millie now. She wasn't overthinking her words or worrying about making mistakes. Instead, she was fully present, enjoying the connection and conversation. Later that day, Millie met a woman at the booth who was also a volunteer. Her name was Samantha, and she had just moved to the area from another state. Samantha struck up a conversation, saying, "This is such a nice event. Have you lived here long?" Normally, Millie might have felt nervous speaking with someone new, but this time she replied easily, "Yeah, I've been here my whole life. It's a pretty quiet town, but events like this make it feel lively." "Where did you move from?" As Samantha shared her story, Millie listened attentively, nodding and adding small comments like, "That's so interesting," or "Wow, that must have been a big change." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and by the end of the day, they had exchanged phone numbers to meet up again. Millie reflected on how far she had come. A year ago, she would have avoided long conversations with strangers, afraid of stumbling over her words. But now, speaking English felt as natural as breathing. She didn't have to think about every phrase or grammar rule. Instead, her focus was on the connection, the emotions, and the meaning behind her words. Her confidence was especially evident when she took on a new challenge, helping her younger cousin Mia with English. Mia, who had recently moved to the U.S., struggled with the language the same way Millie once had. Millie remembered her own early frustrations and knew exactly how to help. One evening, while they were sitting at the kitchen table, Millie asked Mia, "What's something you really love talking about?" Mia hesitated, then said, "Animals." "Perfect," Millie said. "Let's start with that. Pretend I'm someone who loves animals too. Tell me all about your favorite animal." At first, Mia stumbled over her words, searching for the right vocabulary. But Millie encouraged her gently, saying, "It's okay to take your time. Just speak like you're talking to me, in our language. Simple and from the heart." Mia started to relax and said, "I love dolphins because they are smart and beautiful." Millie smiled and replied, "That's a great start. Now try adding something more. Maybe, I love dolphins because they are smart, beautiful, and fun to watch." See how that adds more personality? Mia nodded and repeated the sentence, her voice growing more confident. Over the next few weeks, Millie and Mia practiced together, turning simple sentences into engaging conversations. Watching Mia improve reminded Millie of her own journey and how much she had grown. One day, Millie's English teacher approached her after class. "Millie, I've noticed how much more confident and natural you've become in your speaking. Have you ever thought about joining the debate club?" Millie was surprised. The idea of speaking in front of an audience once would have terrified her. But now, she felt ready for the challenge. "I'll think about it," she said with a smile. A few weeks later, Millie found herself standing in front of her debate club peers, delivering her first argument. Her voice was steady, her words flowed smoothly, and her personality shone through as she added humor and emphasis to her points. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Millie realized that speaking English had truly become second nature to her. The transformation wasn't just about her language skills. It was about the confidence she had gained and the connection she had made along the way. Whether it was chatting with friends, helping her cousin, or standing in front of a crowd, Millie no longer felt like she was trying to speak English. She was simply being herself, and English was now a natural part of who she was. As Millie walked home that evening, she thought about how much her life had changed. She had started this journey feeling unsure and overwhelmed, but step by step, she had built a foundation of natural, confident communication. Speaking English was no longer a task or a challenge. It was just a part of her everyday life. Looking up at the stars, Millie smiled to herself. She knew that her journey would continue, but for now, she felt proud and grateful for how far she had come. English wasn't just a language to her anymore. It was a bridge to new opportunities, friendships, and self-expression. It was, in every sense, second nature.